I wasn't home when the HOA broke in. 5 party buses, over 100 people, music, cameras, trespass. They thought they were throwing a party on an empty mountain cabin. What they didn't know was that every step they took was being recorded, and the trap was already live. I don't usually expect anything interesting from my mailbox. At my age, most of it is predictable. Utility bills, property tax notices, flyers trying to sell me something I already own. It's the quiet, unremarkable rhythm of adult life. The kind you don't question because it means nothing has gone wrong. I live in the city now, Denver. A condo with neighbors close enough that you learn to ignore footsteps in the hallway and televisions through shared walls. It's convenient, efficient, and after a certain point in life, convenience starts to matter more than excitement. But that condo has never been my home. My home, the place that feels like mine, sits hours away, up in the mountains of Chaffee County. A small cabin tucked along an old spur road most people don't even know exists. No streetlights, no sidewalks, no homeowners association, just trees, wind, and silence. That last part mattered more to me than anything else. I didn't stumble into that cabin by accident. I didn't inherit it. I didn't buy it on impulse. I searched for it deliberately, patiently, and expensively, because there was one requirement I would not compromise on: no HOA. People sometimes laugh when I say that. They think it's stubbornness or some generational grudge against rules. But anyone who's lived long enough, anyone who's watched power drift into the wrong hands, understands exactly why I made that choice. I've seen what happens when a handful of people get a little authority and start calling it community. I've watched small committees turn into private governments. I've watched bylaws get interpreted, reinterpreted, and weaponized. And I've watched reasonable people learn, far too late, that signing a deed doesn't always mean owning your land the way you think it does. So, when I started looking for a place in the mountains, I did what most people don't bother to do anymore. I checked everything, not just the listing, not just the title insurance. I pulled the original deed, I reviewed the plat maps, I cross-checked county records, I confirmed easements, access rights, and boundaries line by line. I made sure there were no future development plans, no buffer zones, no quietly written clauses that could someday be used to say, well, actually, when I finally found the cabin, it cost more than similar properties nearby. People asked me why I didn't just buy downhill in one of the newer developments. The answer was simple. Those developments came with rules, boards, presidents, committees, votes, and people who confused proximity with ownership. My cabin didn't. It sat on independently deeded land, surrounded on 3 sides by national forest. The nearest HOA-governed development stopped well short of the old mining road that eventually curved its way up toward my place. Jurisdiction ended there, cleanly, permanently. I paid extra for that certainty, because for me, the cabin wasn't an investment property. It wasn't a vacation rental. It wasn't a venue. It was where I went when I needed the world to stop talking. I didn't go up every weekend. Sometimes months passed between visits. That wasn't neglect. It was trust. Trust in the land, trust in the boundaries, trust in the fact that private property still meant something, at least on paper. And that's the part people like to misunderstand. They assume absence means availability. They assume silence means consent. They assume that if you're not physically present, you've somehow forfeited the right to decide what happens on your own land. I've spent enough years around investigations, disputes, and legal aftermaths to know that assumption is where most trouble begins. The irony is, I didn't buy the cabin to fight anyone. I bought it to be left alone, which is why, when that thick cream-colored envelope showed up in my city mailbox one morning, heavy paper, embossed seal, elegant font, my first reaction wasn't anger, it was recognition. Because you don't send something like that unless you already believe you're entitled to an answer. And you definitely don't send it unless you think the land you're asking about is already within your reach. The envelope stood out immediately. It wasn't white, it wasn't thin. It didn't look like anything that came from a utility company or a government office. This one was cream-colored, heavy in the hand, with a gold emblem pressed neatly into the corner. The lettering was formal, balanced, carefully chosen. It had the look of something meant to impress. The return address read, Vista Crest Peak Association. I remember standing there in the quiet hallway outside my condo, still half awake, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hand, staring at it longer than necessary. At first, I honestly thought it had been misdelivered. Then I remembered something most people forget. Property tax records are public. They don't just list who owns the land. They list where the bills get sent. She'd pulled my tax records. Public information, sure. But it meant she wasn't just looking at the cabin. She was looking at me. I opened the envelope anyway. The paper inside was thick and textured, the kind people use when they want their words to feel heavier than they actually are. The font was elegant, conservative, the tone polite to the point of performance. It read like a wedding invitation. Dear Mr. Wenton, on behalf of the Vista Crest Peak Association, we are pleased to extend a request to lease your beautiful mountain property for our upcoming community summer jam weekend, Friday through Sunday. This private event will welcome families and members of the association for music, food, and fellowship in a scenic environment. We understand you are rarely present at the property and would ensure full cleaning services following the event. We believe this could be a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sincerely, Karen Whitmore, President, Vista Crest Peak Association. I read it twice, not because it was confusing, but because it was revealing. There was something deeply wrong with the confidence behind the language. Not loud arrogance, something smoother, more practiced. A tone that assumed compliance without ever asking for it. And the line that stuck with me, the one that lingered like a fingerprint, was simple. We understand you are rarely present at the property. That wasn't courtesy. That was surveillance by paperwork. I recognized the name immediately. Karen Whitmore. I'd heard it before, always in the same context. The woman who ran the HOA downhill like a private fiefdom. The kind of person who mistook a title for jurisdiction. Her development ended well before the old mining road. That road climbed into switchbacks and trees until it reached my gate. That's where their authority stopped. My land wasn't just outside the HOA. It was never part of it. Grandfathered, independently deeded. Clean title, no shared access, no extended use, no community consideration. And yet, here was the letter. That wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum dipped in sugar. I didn't hesitate when I replied. I sat down, opened my laptop, and wrote back carefully. Not angry, not defensive, but precise. Ms. Whitmore, thank you for your letter. I do not rent or lease my mountain home under any circumstances. The property is not, and has never been, part of the Vista Crest Peak HOA. Please refrain from contacting me with similar requests in the future. Respectfully, Elias Wenton. Before sending it, I attached a copy of my parcel deed, not to argue, just to remove any excuse for confusion. If she stepped foot on that land after reading this, it wouldn't be a misunderstanding. It would be trespassing. The email went out, and for a brief moment, everything went quiet. No reply, no follow-up, no protest, no clarification. That silence would have reassured most people. It didn't reassure me. Because you don't send a letter like that, with that tone, that paper, that assumption, unless you already believe you're entitled to what you're asking for. And when people like that go quiet, it's not because they've accepted no. It's because they're recalculating. Karen Whitmore didn't push, she didn't argue, she disappeared. And that was when I knew this wasn't over. Because the most dangerous part of entitlement isn't when it demands. It's when it starts planning. I've learned not to ignore certain instincts. They don't shout. They don't demand attention. They arrive quietly, usually after something feels almost normal. And that's how you know it isn't. Karen's silence after my email didn't feel like acceptance. It felt like a pause. The kind you hear when someone sets the phone down, not because the conversation is over, but because they're opening a notebook. I didn't confront her. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't warn anyone. I prepared. Over the years, I've worked enough cases to understand a simple truth. When people cross boundaries, they rarely do it by accident the second time. They do it because they've convinced themselves no one is watching. My cabin already had a basic security system, motion sensors, cameras, a cellular uplink for when the internet went down. Enough to deter a curious hiker or a lost tourist. But deterrence wasn't what I wanted. Documentation was. So I upgraded quietly. I didn't turn the place into a fortress. I didn't add anything dramatic or obvious. I just made the system smarter, the way a good watchman is smart, calm, patient, unblinking. Every camera was updated to log not just motion, but identity patterns, faces, vehicle shapes, entry paths, timestamps accurate to the second. Everything backed up automatically, mirrored to cloud storage that didn't care whether the cabin had power or not. Then I added a layer most people never think about. I built a whitelist, my truck, a couple of family vehicles, a neighbor who occasionally checked the place after storms. Those license plates were logged ahead of time and tagged as familiar. Everything else was flagged. The idea was simple. If a vehicle approached my gate and it wasn't on that list, the system would mark it immediately, not with sirens or flashing lights. Just a quiet internal alert. Unknown vehicle detected. It's the same principle banks use for fraud detection. The absence of something expected is often more important than the presence of something unusual. I didn't need to sit there watching screens all day. I just needed to know the moment something arrived that didn't belong. Once that was in place, I tightened the logs. If someone opened the gate, the time would be recorded. If someone forced it, the system would note the method. If a camera went offline, the backup cameras would pick up the slack and tag the interruption. It wasn't paranoia. It was foresight. Before I was done, I made one last call, not to law enforcement and not to a lawyer. I called a friend at the county assessor's office, someone who knew the maps as well as I did. I asked him to double-check the plat records. No changes, no new filings, no surprise easements. My property was still exactly what it had been the day I bought it. Private, independent, off the HOA grid. That confirmation mattered, because it meant that if anything happened next, it wouldn't be a gray area. It wouldn't be a misunderstanding. It would be clean, and clean cases are the ones that hold up in daylight. When I finished, I didn't feel tense. I felt settled. The system was armed, but not in the way people imagine when they hear that word. There were no alarms waiting to scream, no lights ready to flare, just quiet automation, silent observation, a house that knew what belonged and what didn't. I closed the app and went back to my life. Work picked up. Deadlines, meetings, long days that ended with the kind of fatigue you only feel when your brain's been doing all the heavy lifting. The cabin faded back into the background, where it belonged. Days passed, nothing happened. And for a moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong, if Karen had read my response, checked her assumptions, and moved on. That's the dangerous thought, because it's usually right before that, right before you let your guard down, that the other shoe drops. I didn't know when it would happen. I didn't know how. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If someone tried to cross that line again, I wouldn't need to be there to see it. The house would see it for me. The days that followed were quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet you get when a problem has been resolved, but the hollow kind, the kind that feels staged, like a room after someone's just left it, before the air has had time to settle. Karen Whitmore didn't respond to my email. No acknowledgement, no objection, no carefully worded clarification about community misunderstandings. Nothing. At first glance, that might sound like a win. Most people would have taken it as confirmation that the boundary had been respected, that the matter was closed. I didn't. Because silence, when it follows entitlement, is rarely surrender. It's recalibration. I went back to my routines in Denver, early mornings, coffee strong enough to taste like regret, work that demanded focus and rewarded it with fatigue, meetings that blurred together, emails that never seemed to end. On the surface, everything was normal, but in the background, there was a low, persistent awareness, the same one I get when reviewing a case file that looks clean until you realize one detail doesn't quite line up. I checked the cabin app once a day, not obsessively, just enough to confirm nothing had changed. No alerts, no unknown vehicles, no motion beyond the usual deer passing through the clearing at dusk. The system was quiet, too quiet. A week passed, then another, and with each day that went by without incident, the silence grew heavier, not lighter. Because people who genuinely accept no tend to say something, even a clipped response, even a passive-aggressive one. Karen did neither. That told me more than any angry email ever could. It told me she wasn't done. I found myself thinking back to the letter, to the confidence baked into every line, the way it assumed my absence was a detail to be managed rather than a boundary to be respected. People like that don't pivot easily. They don't abandon plans, they adjust them. And adjustment takes time. I didn't change anything. That was important. No extra calls, no warnings, no attempts to get ahead of whatever might be coming. When you move too early, you tip your hand. Instead, I let the system do what it was designed to do. Watch, record, wait. There's a strange calm that comes with that kind of patience. Not because you feel safe, but because you've accepted that if something happens, it will happen on your terms. Documented, time-stamped, undeniable. By the end of the second week, the cabin felt far away again. Just a dot on a map. A place I'd return to when time allowed. I almost convinced myself that was all it would ever be. Almost. Then, late one Saturday morning, while I was halfway through a task I don't even remember now, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It wasn't a system alert. It was a call, from a number I recognized. And before I even answered it, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that tells you the quiet you've been sitting in is about to break. The phone buzzed again before I answered it. That's usually how I know something's wrong. When my hand hesitates, not because I'm busy, but because a part of me already understands what's coming. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause on the other end, not the awkward kind, the cautious kind. "Elias," the voice finally said, "you up at the cabin today?" It was Paul Rafter, my nearest neighbor in the mountains, half a mile downhill, give or take. Horse ranch, former fire lookout back when those still existed. We weren't close friends, but we shared the kind of familiarity that comes from mutual respect and long sightlines. "No," I said. "I'm in Denver." "Why?" Another pause. "Well," he said slowly, "this is going to sound strange, but you're not throwing some kind of party up there, are you?" I stopped what I was doing. "What kind of party?" This time, the pause stretched longer. "Big one," Paul said. "I just watched 5 buses come up the spur road. Full-size party buses. They turned off the highway like they knew exactly where they were going." My stomach tightened, not in panic, but in recognition. "Buses," I repeated. "As in charter buses?" "White ones," he said. "Tinted windows, lights still running. They're pulling in now. Looks like people are unloading tables, balloons, sound equipment." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My hand was already on my phone, opening the security app. The feed took a second to load. Just a brief flicker of static. Then the driveway camera came online. 5 buses. Parked in a staggered line along the gravel clearing just outside my gate. Engines idling, side doors open, people pouring out in clusters. Adults, kids, coolers, folding chairs. Someone wrestled a portable speaker out of a luggage compartment. Another dragged a stack of plastic bins like they'd done this before. Then the alert appeared at the top of the screen. Unknown vehicles detected. 5 license plates, none of them on my whitelist, flagged and logged in under 2 seconds. I felt something click into place. Not anger, not fear, clarity. Paul was still talking, his voice faint through the phone. "I figured you'd want to know. They hung a banner too, big one. Says Vista Crest HOA Summer Jam." The camera angle shifted as one of the buses pulled forward, tires crunching over the gravel I'd laid down myself years earlier. A man in khaki shorts and a polo shirt stepped into frame, clipboard in hand, waving people toward the gate like he was directing traffic into a parking lot he owned. The gate, my gate. I pulled up the access logs. 9:47 a.m. Forced override detected, chain lock severed, keypad tamper recorded. They hadn't wandered in. They'd come prepared. Another feed came online automatically. The porch camera this time. And there it was. A wide vinyl banner stretched between the wooden columns I'd built with my own hands. Vista Crest, HOA Summer Jam. Private event. Private. The word hung there, bold and absurd, flapping slightly in the mountain breeze. People moved through my space like it was public land. Someone set a cooler down on my deck. Kids ran straight for the hammock. A woman tried to hang streamers off the satellite dish like it was a decorative hook. Music started, low at first, then louder. Both thumping hard enough that I could see the railing on the back deck vibrate. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for exactly 1 second, not to calm down, to decide. When I opened them again, the switch had flipped. This wasn't a situation to interrupt. It was a situation to document. I ended the call with Paul and activated the next layer of the system. Exterior lockdown engaged, interior access sealed, microphones live, floodlights armed but dormant, trespass protocol enabled. The software began tagging movement automatically, faces boxed and numbered, paths traced in thin lines across the property map, vehicles logged, entry points marked, timestamps rolling in clean, precise increments. 70 profiles registered within minutes, then 80, then more. From another angle, I watched 2 people wander into the garage, looking for an outlet. They dragged an extension cord across the stone patio, like it belonged to them. On the upper deck camera, someone climbed the steps with a drink already in hand, laughing as they kicked their shoes off near the edge of the deck, posing casually against the railing, the canyon drop yawning just beyond it. A place where one wrong step meant a long fall. A phone came out. A pose, a careless twirl, a TikTok moment, framed perfectly against a view that wasn't theirs. I didn't shout, I didn't curse, I didn't even move from my chair, because by then, it was clear. They hadn't broken into an empty cabin. They'd walked straight into evidence. Once the switch flipped, everything slowed down. Not outside, out there, the chaos was building, but inside my head. That's how I know I'm past the point of reacting and into the part where decisions matter. I watched, not as an owner watching strangers touch his things, but as an investigator watching a scene assemble itself piece by piece. The first thing that struck me wasn't the noise, it was the certainty. The way people moved like they'd been told this place belonged to them. No hesitation, no looking around to ask, "Are we allowed to be here?" They unpacked with muscle memory, folding tables unfolded along my deck, their legs scraping against wood I'd sanded and sealed myself. Someone dragged a grill across the stone patio and set it down without even checking what it rested on. When the lid flipped open, sparks jumped, tiny, careless flashes, and I watched a dark scorch bloom into the edge of my teak bench. That bench had been there longer than most of the people standing on it. I felt my jaw tighten, then I let it go. Anger is loud, evidence is quiet. On another feed, a man staggered toward the trees just off the trail that led downhill. He disappeared from view, then reappeared a minute later, zipping his jacket as he walked back toward the music. That spot fed into the same runoff that supplied my water line. I made a note: time, camera ID, direction of travel. Nearby, a group of kids had discovered the woodpile. They clambered over it, laughing, tossing split logs like toys. One slipped and skinned a knee. He cried for a moment, then got pulled back into the noise by an adult who didn't even look at where they were standing. No one considered that this wasn't a park, or that the ground here didn't forgive mistakes. Up on the deck, drinks multiplied. Cups appeared on railings, on windowsills, on the steps. Someone leaned back against the handrail that overlooked the canyon and kicked their heels against the wood, completely unaware, or unconcerned, with how little stood between them and open air. I zoomed in just enough to see the grin on their face. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just trespass, it was recklessness. If someone fell, if a child wandered too far, if a grill tipped or a spark caught dry pine needles, there would be injuries, lawsuits, headlines, and someone else's version of events. That's why I didn't intervene. I didn't call out. I didn't trigger alarms. I didn't do anything that might scatter them or give them time to coordinate a story. Instead, I let the system work. The microphones picked up laughter, music, snippets of conversation. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal on its own, but all of it placed exactly where it shouldn't have been. The cameras followed movement patterns automatically, drawing thin lines across the property map. Here they entered, here they clustered, here they spread. Every path a record, every stop a timestamp. By the half-hour mark, the count had passed 90, then 100. From the garage feed, I watched 2 people rummaging through shelves, lifting boxes, opening cabinets. They weren't stealing, not yet. They were searching for outlets, for supplies, for permission they assumed existed. One of them pulled an extension cord from the wall and ran it straight across the patio, right through a footpath. I imagined the tripping hazard, the twisted ankle, the phone call that would have followed. Someone got hurt on your property. I made another note. Outside, the music grew louder. A DJ setup took shape near the fire pit I'd built with my own hands 2 summers ago. Speakers stacked, cables snaked. Someone tested a microphone, sending a sharp squeal across the clearing that made even the deer scatter at the tree line. A banner flapped above it all, still proudly declaring the event private. Private. The word felt obscene. My phone buzzed again, not with an alert, but with a message from the system confirming what I already knew. Trespass status, active, duration, ongoing. I leaned back and let out a slow breath. This was the part most people misunderstand when they imagine restraint. They think it's passive, weak. It isn't. It's deliberate, because every minute they stayed made the case stronger. Every careless act stacked weight onto a scale that was already tipping. I didn't need to stop the party. I needed to let it prove what it was. So I watched as someone cracked open hard seltzers near the edge of the deck, as kids ran past an open gate, as adults laughed and posed for videos with a canyon behind them like a prop. And I thought about how easily this could have gone another way. If I hadn't checked records, if I hadn't installed cameras, if I'd assumed silence meant respect, I thought about how many people live one bad assumption away from losing control of their own property. That's when I reached for the phone again. Not to call Karen, not to argue, but to bring in someone who didn't care about her assumptions at all. I didn't raise my voice when I called the sheriff's office. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't speculate. I stuck to facts. "This is Elias Wenton," I said. "I'm the owner of a private residence off Old Monarch Spur Road, approximately 6 miles west of the Vista Crest development. I'm not on site. There is a coordinated trespass occurring on my property right now." There was a brief pause on the line. Paper shuffled. Keys clicked. "Sir," the dispatcher said carefully, "that location isn't under the HOA's jurisdiction." "That's exactly the issue," I replied. "This isn't accidental. There are charter buses, caterers, and signage. The gate was forced. I have live video, access logs, and time-stamped footage." The tone changed immediately. "Stay on the line," she said. "Deputies are en route." I ended the call and switched my attention back to the feeds. The first patrol SUV appeared about 20 minutes later, easing up the spur road without lights or sirens. Smart. Anyone who's worked these mountains knows quiet beats chaos. 2 deputies stepped out, one older, one younger. They paused at the edge of the clearing, hands resting naturally near their belts, scanning the crowd. The music didn't stop. Most people didn't even notice them at first. That changed when the older deputy keyed his radio. "Dispatch, confirm," he said. "We've got a large gathering on private land. Estimate 90 to 100 individuals, requesting backup." Conversations dipped, heads turned, phones lowered. A woman with a clipboard, probably a volunteer, approached with a smile that assumed this was a formality. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "Are you with the venue?" "No, ma'am," the deputy replied. "Sheriff's Department." The smile flickered. "Oh, well, this is a sanctioned HOA event. We have approval." "For this address?" the deputy asked. She hesitated. "Well, technically it's just outside Vista Crest, but that'll be enough," he said. "Please step back." That's when I activated the 2-way audio. The speakers mounted under the porch eaves, the same ones tied into the camera system, came alive. My voice didn't come from a phone. It came from the house itself. "This land is not part of Vista Crest," I said, calmly, evenly. "It is privately deeded property. I am the owner, Elias Wenton, deed number 9946B, Chaffee County." The effect was immediate. People froze. Some looked toward the house. Others glanced around like they were trying to locate where the voice was coming from. "I am not on site," I continued. "I am monitoring this in real time from Denver. You are standing on my land without permission. The gate was forced at 9:47 a.m. That has been recorded." The deputies looked up at the porch, then back at the crowd. A ripple of unease moved through the clearing. And then Karen Whitmore stepped into view. She didn't hurry. She didn't look flustered. She walked forward like someone arriving late to a meeting she expected to control. Sunglasses in place, phone in hand. That practiced expression of authority locked firmly on her face. "What exactly is the problem here?" she asked, addressing the deputies, not the voice that had just spoken. "This property is not under HOA jurisdiction," the older deputy said. "We believe this event was organized without the landowner's consent." Karen scoffed. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "Mr. Wenton owns the cabin, yes, but he's not here. He lives in Denver. Everyone knows that." "That doesn't give you permission to occupy it," the younger deputy replied. Karen's tone sharpened. "I'm the president of the HOA," she said. "This is a sanctioned community event. You're disrupting it." The older deputy didn't blink. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you don't command the sheriff's department." That landed hard. Karen turned slightly, frustration bleeding through her composure. "He's disrupting a sanctioned community event," she snapped. "According to the schedule I track, he's supposed to be in Denver until Tuesday." The clearing went quiet. Even the music seemed to dip. The younger deputy turned slowly. "You track his schedule?" he asked. Karen opened her mouth, then stopped. For just a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. "I mean," she began, but it was already too late. The older deputy stepped aside and spoke into his radio. "Dispatch," he said. "We may be looking at additional issues here, possible premeditation." Another deputy began photographing the gate, the severed chain, the damaged keypad. Names started being taken, one by one, license plates logged, body cameras rolling. Near the buffet table, a man quietly set his plate down. A woman pulled her kids closer. Someone lifted their phone again. But this time, they weren't filming the party. They were filming Karen. She stood there, suddenly aware that the house itself had spoken against her, that her authority meant nothing when confronted with deeds, timestamps, and a voice that didn't need to be present to be heard. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply let the house finish what it had started." Because at that moment, the story she'd been telling everyone collapsed under the weight of the truth. And this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a crime scene. Once the deputies began taking names, the party died without anyone turning the music off. It just thinned. Laughter faded into murmurs. Conversations broke into fragments. People started looking at each other the way strangers do after realizing they've been told different versions of the same story. A man near the grill set his tongs down slowly, as if noise alone might attract attention. A couple folded a table they had just finished setting up, hands moving faster than they needed to. Someone began stacking cups. Another wiped down a surface that hadn't been dirty a minute earlier. It was the sound of realization setting in. I watched it spread in waves, first confusion, then embarrassment. Then something sharper, the understanding that they hadn't just attended a party. They'd walked into a problem with names, timestamps, and consequences. A woman with a stroller approached one of the deputies, her voice low. She nodded while he spoke, then nodded again, more stiffly, like she was trying to accept something she didn't want to hear. She glanced back toward Karen, then at the deputy, and mouthed a quiet, "Thank you." A man in his 30s, clean shirt, expensive watch, raised his hand and asked, Are we in trouble?" The deputy answered calmly, professionally. "You're on private property without permission," he said. "We're documenting everyone who entered. If you leave now and cooperate, that will be reflected." That was all it took. People began drifting toward the gate in small groups, careful not to rush, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Parents gathered children. Teenagers stopped filming. Phones slipped quietly back into pockets. A few people glanced toward the porch, toward the speakers mounted under the eaves, as if the house itself might speak again. It didn't need to. Karen stood near the center of it all, arms folded tight, phone clenched in her hand. She spoke in short, urgent bursts to anyone who passed close enough to hear. "This is being blown out of proportion. It's just paperwork. They're overreacting." But fewer and fewer people were listening. One woman shook her head and walked past her without responding. Another man cut her off mid-sentence, his voice flat and controlled. "You told us he approved this," he said. "You said it was handled." Karen snapped back immediately. I never said that. Yes, you did, he replied. You said he was out of town and wouldn't care. A few heads turned. Someone else added, You said it was community land. Another voice followed, quieter but sharper. You said it was legal. Karen's jaw tightened. I was misinformed, she said sharply. This isn't my fault. He changed his mind. No one answered her. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was separation. The deputies continued their work. License plates logged, IDs recorded, body cameras capturing the slow collapse of a narrative that had sounded so confident only hours earlier. From one of the side cameras, I watched Karen drift closer to the gate as people passed her. Not leading, not directing, just standing there, trying to insert herself into conversations that no longer belonged to her. A deputy approached her directly. Ma'am, he said, we'll need your information as well. Karen bristled. I'm not a participant. I organized this. The deputy met her eyes. Then you'll want to cooperate. She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Behind her, the banner still hung from my porch. Private event. The word now stripped of any authority it pretended to carry. One by one, the clearing emptied. The buses, however, remained parked. Engines silent. Their drivers stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with the uneasy stillness of people who had just realized they weren't just transportation anymore. They were witnesses. Or liabilities. I saw the younger deputy break away from the gate and walk toward the lead bus. He didn't approach casually. He approached with purpose. He spoke briefly with the driver, then gestured toward the front of the bus. The driver nodded, climbed back into the cab, and returned with a clipboard. I zoomed in, not close enough to read details, not yet, but close enough to recognize what I was looking at. A manifest, a route sheet, and clipped beneath it, paperwork that didn't belong to a driver's log. The deputy flipped through the pages. His posture shifted subtly. Less crowd control now, more investigation. That wasn't just a schedule, that was a contract. Near the deck, Karen stood alone now, watching deputies move with growing urgency. She didn't look toward the buses. She couldn't. Somewhere in that paperwork was proof she hadn't planned on anyone examining. And as I watched the clipboard disappear into an evidence bag, I felt something settle into place. Because buses don't end up on mountain land by accident. They end up there because someone signed something. And whoever signed it had just tied their name, or someone else's, directly to my property. I already knew what came next. I was going to pull that thread. The real damage didn't happen on the mountain. It happened later, quietly, in offices, across email threads and document servers. That's something most people don't understand about cases like this. The scene, the buses, the deputies, the crowd, that's just the front door. The real house is built out of paperwork, and paperwork always tells the truth. Eventually. The first call came 2 days after the incident. It wasn't from the sheriff. It wasn't from Karen. It was from the transportation company. The man on the line sounded confused more than concerned. That was my first clue. Mr. Wenton, he said, we received a subpoena related to a charter event last weekend. We're trying to reconcile something before we respond. Go on, I said. There's a contract on file for 5 buses, he continued. The event host is listed as you. I didn't answer right away. That's not possible, I said finally. I didn't rent any buses. There was a pause. Well, he said carefully, the paperwork says otherwise. He emailed me the contract while we were still on the phone. I opened it slowly. There it was, my name, my property address, my cabin listed as the event location, and beneath it, the part that made my stomach tighten, was a signature. It looked like mine, not perfect, not clean, but close enough to pass a casual review. I didn't react emotionally. I did what I always do. I examined the file, metadata first, creation date, modification history, author credentials. The document hadn't been scanned. It had been generated digitally, created 11 days before the party. Author, K. Whitmore_exec. That alone would have raised eyebrows in any courtroom. But Karen hadn't stopped there. She must have had a copy of my signature, my attorney said later. She did. I found it in the county records, a fence permit application I'd filed 5 years earlier. Public record, high-resolution scan. My signature clearly visible at the bottom of the page. She'd cropped it, cleaned it, pasted it, same scan artifacts, same ink distortion, same microscopic smudge where the pen had hesitated. She hadn't forged my signature freehand, she'd stolen it. Then the transportation rep said something that changed the scope of everything. "We did a confirmation call the week of the event," he said. "Standard procedure for large bookings." "Who did you speak to?" I asked. He read back the number. It wasn't mine. It was close. 1 digit off, but it wasn't mine. I ran it immediately. Prepaid carrier. No subscriber name. Activated 2 days before the confirmation call. Deactivated less than 24 hours after. A burner phone. But burners still leave shadows. The call had pinged a cell tower, the same tower that serviced the Vista Crest HOA office. Karen hadn't just impersonated me, she'd done it from her own backyard. Then I asked the last question. "Who paid for the buses?" Another pause. "The Vista Crest Peak HOA," he said. "From their operating account." That was the trap. Karen had used HOA funds to pay the invoice, misappropriation, while listing me as the event host/responsible party on the contract. If something had gone wrong, an injury, a DUI, an accident on the mountain road, liability would have pointed straight at me. She wrapped herself in the HOA's checkbook and handed me the legal exposure, forgery, identity fraud, misuse of HOA funds, all premeditated. I forwarded everything to my attorney. Then I requested the HOA's internal records, meeting minutes, bylaws, event approvals. That's when we found the PDF, Extended Community Use, Informal Agreement 2018. It listed my parcel, it listed my name, and it carried the same stolen signature. The document had never been filed with the county, never notarized, never approved by a board vote. It existed only inside the HOA's internal archive, a fabricated reality. My attorney sent everything to the county clerk. I sent a copy to someone else, a friend in the district attorney's office in Buena Vista. Within a week, a formal investigation was opened. Karen didn't know that yet, but the HOA board did. Because 3 days after the civil complaint was filed, the calls started coming. Not from Karen, from the others. Careful voices, measured words they hadn't known. That was the phrase they kept repeating. One board member asked to meet privately. He chose a Safeway parking lot, like we were trading state secrets instead of emails. His name was Greg. He handed me a thumb drive. Inside were internal messages, Slack threads, emails. Karen, writing plainly, "We'll call it community expansion. No one reads land use policy. He's in Denver. He won't even know." I made it look like he approved it. There was no ambiguity left. Karen hadn't misunderstood anything. She hadn't guessed. She'd planned it. And now the evidence didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to the state. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers. The civil suit landed first. Clean, precise, impossible to misread. Criminal trespass, breaking and entering, fraudulent misrepresentation, identity theft, misuse of HOA funds, each count backed by timestamps, contracts, metadata, and witness statements. Then the insurance carrier called, not to defend the HOA, to step away from it. The representative's tone was careful, almost apologetic. That was how I knew the decision had already been made. "Mr. Wenton," she said, "after reviewing the materials submitted, our position is that the actions taken by the HOA president constitute intentional criminal conduct." Intentional, that word matters. "Under the terms of the policy," she continued, "intentional acts are excluded from coverage. The association will need to retain independent counsel. No coverage, no defense fund, no safety net. That single call did more damage to the HOA than any lawsuit ever could. Because when insurance walks away, reality shows up. The board scrambled. Emergency meetings were called. Some properly noticed, some not. Lawyers began emailing other lawyers. Emails that used to CC half the neighborhood suddenly went dark, replaced by private threads and late-night phone calls. Karen tried to regain control. She convened an emergency vote among a smaller circle, one that wasn't announced in accordance with the bylaws. During that meeting, she framed the situation as a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. A community celebration twisted into a legal ambush. She claimed the board had approved the event. She claimed she was being unfairly targeted, and then she crossed the line she couldn't uncross. She produced edited email chains, not fabricated from scratch. That would have been obvious, but trimmed, cropped, context removed, just enough missing to change meaning without changing words. She urged board members to sign affidavits stating they believe my property had long been considered part of the extended community grounds. One board member refused. 2 days later, that same member received a notice of violation for an unauthorized patio extension that had existed for over a decade. The message was clear: fall in line or pay. That tactic didn't have the effect Karen expected. It didn't consolidate loyalty. It exposed fear. Resignations followed, quietly at first, then publicly. People who had stayed silent now had a reason not to. With insurance gone, liability had names attached to it: personal names, bank accounts, retirement plans. No one wanted to be the last person holding the pen. The county's white-collar crimes unit entered next, officially under the banner of a zoning compliance audit. Unofficially, everyone knew what they were really there for. They requested financial records, then digital communications, then hardware. Karen claimed her HOA-issued laptop had been lost during a recent move. That lie lasted less than a week. When the device was recovered and imaged, the digital forensics team found what hurried people always leave behind: deleted emails, cached drafts, and half-finished messages never meant to be read. One thread stood out. Subject: community access language. Workaround: in it, Karen asked a legal assistant, off the books, for phrasing that could imply community access rights without claiming deed ownership. Something soft, she wrote. Something that would stand up if questioned. The assistant refused and documented the exchange. That documentation went straight into the case file. Then something unexpected happened. One of the guests from the party came forward, a man who had brought his kids, someone who had believed Karen when she said the event was approved. He hadn't intended to become a witness, but he'd taken a selfie video. It had gone mildly viral on TikTok the week of the party. Nothing special, bad music, sunburned smiles, a canyon in the background. What mattered wasn't the video, it was the audio. In the background, clear enough once cleaned up, Karen's voice could be heard laughing. "He'll never even know," she said. "He's in Denver. It's not like he has cameras up here." The forensic team isolated the clip, enhanced it, and matched it to known voice samples. It was her. Premeditation, awareness, intent. The charges escalated: criminal trespass, forgery of legal documents, fraudulent impersonation, misuse of association funds, retaliatory conduct within a governing body. Karen tried to change the narrative one last time. During a recorded HOA Zoom meeting, one I later obtained, she claimed she was being politically targeted, that the investigation was a witch hunt meant to undermine female leadership in a male-dominated space. It might have worked, until she snapped. "You all knew," she said, sharp and bitter. "You just don't want to admit it now that he's got lawyers." That was the moment it broke. One by one, board members publicly disavowed her. Some resigned. Others submitted sworn affidavits detailing how she'd manipulated documentation, threatened fines, and silenced dissent. The final blow came from her own vice president, a retired municipal planner named Ruth. Ruth submitted a letter to the county prosecutor stating that Karen had acted independently, with intent to mislead both the community and the board, and that multiple votes and expenditures had been rushed, misrepresented, or fabricated entirely. Karen was removed by unanimous vote. No speech, no applause, just a line in the minutes. Within weeks, the HOA's attorney reached out to mine with an offer, a settlement, $370,000. No negotiation, no counteroffers. They wanted it over. Karen, meanwhile, faced criminal sentencing. The district attorney offered a deal: 2 years of supervised probation, restitution, and a prohibition from holding any administrative, fiduciary, or enforcement role in any HOA, community board, or municipal committee for 10 years. She accepted. Not because she agreed, because there was nothing left to fight with. Power had carried her exactly as far as it could, and then it dropped her. I didn't go back to the cabin right away. After the hearings, after the filings, after the quiet flood of messages from reporters looking to turn the story into something louder than it ever needed to be, I stayed where I was, in the city. I let the noise burn itself out. There's a temptation, after something like this, to rush back to the scene, to reclaim it, to stand where the trouble happened and prove it's over. I've learned that closure doesn't work that way. 2 months passed before I drove up the old spur road again. The trees had started to turn, that Colorado gold creeping down the slopes like fire, lighting the forest from the inside out. No buses this time, no banners, no voices echoing where they didn't belong, just wind. When I reached the gate, I stopped the truck and got out. Not because it was broken, it wasn't, but because it was different. Heavier steel, reinforced hinges, motion-activated lights angled just enough to illuminate faces without advertising themselves. Subtle changes, permanent ones. And bolted at eye level, centered and unapologetic, was a small metal sign, laser-etched, weatherproof, private property, no trespassing, simple, clear, final. I walked the perimeter slowly. The deck had been sanded and resealed where it needed it. The fence line straightened, the chain replaced. You'd never know 100 strangers had once treated this place like a venue. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The cameras still logged movement. The system still tracked faces, now cleared, reset, quiet. Karen Whitmore's profile had been archived, tagged, and locked away like a closed case file. A clean slate. That evening, I sat on the back deck with a drink and watched the sun drop behind the mountains. No music, no laughter, just the low, steady sound of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. Later, out of idle curiosity more than anything else, I pulled up the news on my tablet. Karen had moved to Arizona. There was a short item buried deep in a local paper about her attempt to join a retirement community board, and the swift rejection that followed after someone Googled her name. The HOA back in Vista Crest had new leadership now. They'd started sending out actual community surveys, listening sessions, transparency initiatives. I received one in the mail a week later. How do you feel about increased neighborly engagement? I checked one box, do not engage, and sent it back. As darkness settled in, I leaned back and let the silence do what it does best. This place didn't need drama to protect it. It didn't need confrontation. It didn't need me standing guard with a raised voice. She thought she was invading an empty house. She didn't know she was walking into a smart trap. And that, I've found, is how justice works best. Quietly, precisely, with witnesses.